Here we go. So today we're going to go to Paestum, which is the ancient Greek town of Posiedona. I need to get this back up over here. Okay. And it is in southern Italy here, this area you can see south of Naples. For those of y'all who are new here, I am coming to you from Posiedona, my home in Tuscany, just to the southwest of Florence. And it is here on the estate of the castle of Posiedona. So you can see the castle there, and that's my house there on the right. So I'm coming to you from my little farmhouse in Tuscany. So again, we're going to go down to southern Italy, to that area south of Naples, to what is now known as Paestum. So the town was founded during the period of Greek expansion in the Mediterranean and was part of what was known as Magna Graecia. So if y'all recall, in the 8th century BC, the Greeks started to colonize the Mediterranean basin, and they sent out large numbers of colonists. And on the left there, you can actually see some of the towns in southern Italy and some of the zones that were founded by different areas of Greece. So we're going to talk about Posiedona, which was founded as a sub-colony of Sibari, which you see here on the Ionian coast of Calabria. And Sibari was a colony of Argos here in the Peloponnese. So the Sibarites, for one reason or another, the 700s BC, decided to found a sub-colony over here, and they actually went by sea. They landed over here in this area and were looking for a site to set up a new town. And we're not sure why they went. There may have been a civil war, so there may have been groups of people who were exiled from Sibari. They may have been going to trade. There was the Etruscans were in this area. This is actually the border. There's a river here called the Selle, which actually was the border of Etruscan held territory. So they perhaps went in order to have a port from which they could trade with the Etruscans, or maybe both of those things. In any event, the people who settled were from Sibari, and they did in fact trade with the Etruscans. So when they first got to this area, they were looking for a place to found their town. Of course, this area was full of tribes. It wasn't just wide open for them. And they first set up shop in this town called Agropoli, and they had a fortress here, and there was a nice little natural port. So they kind of set up a home base there, while they spent some time, decades even, kind of making alliances with some of these local tribes and trying to make, kind of create an atmosphere so that they could actually settle a town, and found this, what became a relatively important frontier outpost. So they eventually, in 600 BC, went down into the plain of this river valley, founded the town called Posiedona. And it's right here, kind of in the middle of their territory. So they had a town, which we're going to look at, but they also needed all of this agricultural land because A, they had to feed their citizens, and B, they were actually going to trade as well. So they traded, and we know that they, we found evidence of this here and there. We have things like amphora that came from Posiedona that had wine in it that were being sent all over the Mediterranean. So some of their agricultural products were then traded around the Mediterranean. So the southern border of their territory is Agropoli, and the northern border of their territory is here, the river Selle, where on the other side, in this nice fertile plain, are the Etruscans. And the Etruscans, they had a camp here at Ponte Cagnano. And then, of course, there's some Italic tribes here as well. So they decided to basically invade, set up a town, and had to kind of keep a balance between the various other tribes and peoples who were living here. So when they set up shop, again, they kind of claimed all this as their territory, and then right in the middle set up the town of Posiedona. And you're looking here at just kind of a schematic drawing. You can see they have very sturdy defensive walls, 5 miles of defensive walls circle the town. And then they had religious sanctuaries here in the center of town to the south, with 2 temples that we're going to take a closer look at. This was the agora of the Greeks, which was kind of their marketplace, but also a place for political assemblies, public manifestations. And then on the other side of that, in blue again, another religious sanctuary. There's a temple to Athena here, so the northern sanctuary. And on either side of that kind of main block of town were residences, and then places also sort of workshops for ceramic production, kilns, that kind of thing, the kind of thing that just all of those sorts of workshops that kept the city going. So from above today, this is what it looks like. You can still really see, look how demarcated the defensive walls are. And the fields today, I mean, look again, this is the line of the defensive walls. I mean, just look at the fields, literally are bordered by the walls of Paestum, which are still standing. And the temples are still standing, they're huge, and quite a few monuments are still there and very obvious, although a lot of the residences and whatnot sort of crumbled and then were covered with kind of silted up and have turned into farmland. So there's literally just, family farms on top of this ancient archaeological site. Here's a more close-up view. Here's the two temples of the southern sanctuary, the agora, and then some of the residences, residential area you can see has been excavated. Otherwise, it's farmland. Here's somebody's house, right here on top of the archaeological site. And there's a road that runs right through here. And this is SP 278, was laid out before World War II, and just cut right through the site and actually cut straight through an ancient amphitheater. They just weren't so worried about preservation as we are today. I mean, today, if you find a shard of ceramic and everybody's all excited about it, they weren't so worried about it. They literally drove a road through the amphitheater. So here's what it looks like from above. So remember, we're in this Greek kind of frontier outpost. The people who settled here were anxious to maintain their Greek identity. They're also very anxious to let everybody else know that we're Greek and this is our territory. Hence these kind of major, this major building program that really lasted for several hundred years. Here's another view from the other direction. You can see how close the water is. The water was actually even closer in back in the 7th century BC. So they came down into this plain, and these towns were founded generally in spring when they could plant grains that they could then have first year's harvest. So in spring they came down and founded their town, laid out the defensive walls. The residents were actually living in very simple huts made out of just basically sort of wood and terracotta. They eventually had sort of nicer residences. Not much of that survived, sort of ankle high ruins. But even though they were living relatively humbly, they started building these enormous, major temples. Very permanent. Obviously, they're still here 2,500 years later. So this program, their building program goes from the 7th century BC to the 3rd century BC. Again, they're declaring their Greek identity, their control over the territory as well. So they had small temples out and about in their agricultural territory. We believe there was a temple to Poseidon down here at Agropoli. There's nothing left of that. And then up top, at the northern border along the river Sele was a temple to Hera, and actually an entire sanctuary with various temples to Hera kind of marking the northern border. So there wasn't a wall up there, but there was this very imposing sanctuary with various temples that would have looked similar to what you're seeing here in the southern sanctuary. And the buildings themselves don't exist any longer. You can just see their footprint there in that overhead kind of satellite looking view on the left. This is, again, next to the river Sele, so it's kind of marshland, and the buildings were, well constructed, but they just didn't have the foundation to last. So the buildings are no longer there, although you can see footprints of several enormous structures and a couple of smaller structures, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 at least. So we don't have the buildings, but we actually do have some of the decoration from the buildings and the friezes. And we'll see this closer in a moment. The frieze of a Greek temple is alternating metopes and triglyphs. And in this case, the metopes were sculpted with reliefs. And the reliefs they chose to use, this is just after the founding of the town. Right when they founded the town, one of the first things they did was this to begin building on this border sanctuary. And typically, as they neared the end of the building of these buildings, which have taken decades, they began to decorate them. So 570 BC, these metope reliefs are being sculpted, and they're sculpted in Greek national myths. And so you see they've chosen certain scenes from the Greek national myths. It would be appropriate for this location on the border. So first of all, this whole entire sanctuary is dedicated to Hera. Hera is the wife of Zeus. She's the mother of the gods. She is also the goddess of fertility, marriage, prosperity, prosperity of nature, of man, of the community itself. And the temple, there is a temple to Hera in the city, and that's sort of her guise in the city. But she's also, she guards borders. And so that's clearly what she's doing here. She's guarding the border. She's also the protectress of weapons and hence of the military in that certain aspect. So in a sense, protects the polis in that way. And we'll hear more about that in a moment. So 570 BC, on the northern border, here's Hera, she's protecting the border. They've chosen what kinds of images they're going to use for their decorative frieze. And they're showing, in this case, Heracles, who maintains order. He stands for justice and defense. And this is an idea of what he does to people who don't follow the rules, right? Or who cross him. So people who don't play along. This is Heracles and the Cercos, and he's obviously torturing them. They're hung upside down and he's hauling them away. They're bound. So there's that. So if you're an enemy invader, you get a look at that and might think twice, as it's up there on the, sort of the facade of this absolutely gigantic, imposing temple. Here's another one. This is a triglyph with its metope next to it. This is Apollo and Artemis. They're armed and they're protecting their mother. They're actually going out to get revenge for their mother. So again, kind of this idea of protecting the motherland here and protecting the polis. These are interesting kind of almost outline reliefs, and they had been considered unfinished for a long time. Just within the past, I think 5 years, they've done some work here on the, they've analyzed these reliefs and have actually found bits of residue of paint that's not visible to the naked eye, but there is paint residue on here. So the details would have been finished in paint. And there's a lot of use of paint in temples, in what is sort of called, Western Greece, in Southern Italy and Sicily. A lot of use of paint, even more so than sculpture. Sculpture was kind of the main decorative material used in Greece itself, but there was a lot of kind of decorative paint going on in Western Greece. So these would have been finished again with paint. So let's go back into town and take a look at this temple. This is also dedicated to Hera, and the building here was contemporaneous with the other temple to Hera. So Hera and her two guises. One is she's guarding the borders, and one is she is the kind of goddess of childbirth and fertility and kind of the kind of life of the community. So here is what's left of this building. It's actually, but all the columns are still standing and the frieze is intact. Everything, the architrave that is, everything above has fallen. So this is built about 560, again, contemporaneous with the sanctuary at the northern border. And we believe this was dedicated to Hera. We don't actually know that for a fact. There's no cult statue found here. There's no inscription even on the stones, which is quite normal. The cult statues of these major temples usually do not exist any longer. They were made out of precious materials, either bronze or even gold and ivory. And those things were generally plundered and then melted down or used for something else over the successive millennia. So it's quite normal that a cult statue doesn't exist. So we don't have any cult statue. We also don't have any kind of documentary evidence. This was a relatively peripheral border town. There's not a lot of, there are not a lot of ancient documents that talk about it. So we don't really have anything written other than about Posiedona, other than who founded it and that the Romans took over in 273 BC. Other than that, we have to just look at the evidence that exists. And the evidence that exists here that points to Hera are just hundreds and hundreds of votive objects that were found in front of the temple, near the altar and some of the ritual baths and areas for making these votive offerings. And this is just a very small selection of some of them. So you get an idea of what people were doing here. The inscription on that silver disc, that kind of tarnished silver up there on the top left, that's an inscription, and it says, Sacro di Hera, fortifica nostri archi. We worship Hera, strengthen our bows. So here she is, protectress of weapons. So she's being honored in that form also here in town. And she also, interestingly, was the kind of gave protection to the boys who go through this initiation rite of passing from adolescence to adulthood. And so sort of an elite military exercise, and they were under the protection of Hera. So these young men who would go off and perform these military exercises and then sort of come back to town as adults. And that all had to do with Hera. So men and women were both coming here to worship at the temple of Hera. And then the other small terracotta votive offerings that you've seen, they're sort of about this big, made out of terracotta. And there would have been local workshops for all this kind of stuff. They're really kind of showing her in her guise as protector of childbirth, fertility. You see her actually seated, holding a mother and child, holding a child in her arms. She's often shown with a pomegranate, symbols of life, birth, and rebirth. You can see here all of these images. She's holding a pomegranate in one hand and a pater in the other hand, which is kind of a very shallow vessel used for making ritual libations. Here's the temple again, 560 BC. It's quite large. In fact, it's huge. It's 80 by 120 feet. It's enormous. And for this area, this is probably the first huge building that ever went up there. The Etruscans to the north and the Italic tribes were probably just terrified by this thing. And that was sort of, it was half the point of this building, was almost as a defensive measure. And this is architecture for power. It expressed ambitions over the territory. It was a defensive measure. And again, sort of helped the Greeks express their identity. I mean, their life really kind of revolved around art, culture, and ritual, and that all happened out here at these various temples. This is, and all of the temples here at Paestum are kind of textbook perfect examples of Doric temples, Doric temple architecture. And you can kind of see one key to that here are the columns. And if you'll notice, these are perfect Doric columns. They stand directly on the stylobate, on the base. They don't have a base themselves. They just sit directly on that podium of the building. They are fluted. They have those little sort of waves carved into them. They're made out of different drums. Once they went up, then the stonemason came along and fluted them. And temples of Doric temples have 20 flutes. That's just how it was done. They're also much wider at the bottom. Their diameter is much wider at the bottom than at the top, so that they kind of narrow in. They kind of bow out in the middle and narrow in. That is called entasis. And that helps our eye kind of read these columns as weight-bearing structures. If they were completely in line, our eye would read them as concave, and they would look kind of weak. And so in order to kind of maintain that idea of strength, they actually bow out a little bit so that our eye reads them as straight and strong. And they've done the same thing to the stylobate, the base. It's actually slightly raised in the center. Had they built it level, it's such a large building, from a distance it would look like it sags in the middle. And so to avoid that, they just kind of tweaked the base a little bit, popped it up a little bit in the center so that we actually read it as flat. That's quite common for Greek temples. And these are the kind of architectural details that are being traded back and forth from Sicily to southern Italy to Greece. These guys all knew what was going on. They did certain kind of tweak certain things for the specific local areas and the specific people who commissioned them, these temples, but for the main part, they all definitely were kind of participating in kind of a plan here. There was a sort of canons of Doric architecture that were being followed. So here, notice we've got, in this case, there are 9 by 18 columns around the edge, this colonnade that goes all the way around the edge. And then there are 7 columns in the middle of the naos. This is slightly odd that it divides the space in two. There would have been a cult statue in here. And for the most part, the only people who are going in and out of the temples are priests and priestesses. Although the Temple of Hera, there was a procession that was practiced in the Argive, the Temple of Hera in Argos. Remember, that was kind of the founding town of the Sybarites, who then founded the subcolony of Posiedona, where armed men actually proceeded into the temple and then proceeded back out. And they believe this happened here, and they would have processed into the temple, back out of the temple, and then all the way from here to the sanctuary of Hera, 9 kilometers to the north, armed men processing through the countryside. So they're practicing their rites, but at the same time, making a kind of a statement to all of their neighbors. You can imagine sort of this procession of armed men coming out of the city of Posiedona and going up to the border and coming back. This is a reconstruction of what the temple might have looked like. It's made out of that kind of amber colored stone, local tufa, but covered in white paint so that it just gleamed pure white. And then the decoration here, again, was more paint than sculpture. And you can see the triglyphs and metopes are done, in this case, sort of yellow and blue. And then there was this sema, which we have a bit of right here. And you can see it's got, this is terracotta, lion head downspouts, and painted kind of almost garishly in red and blue. And we also have these little bits of acroterium. And so you can see what it would have looked like when the building was complete, quite elaborate. So again, most of the action was taking place on the exterior of these temples. And here you can kind of get an idea of just some of what was out here. There are altars in front of both of the temples that were dedicated to the deities of the temples themselves. There were wells for ritual baths. There were sacelle, these underground cells for receiving votive offerings. There are also other altars out here, not just to the two main divinities, but also to other deities for sacrifices, for other rites. So this is sort of highly populated, and there's lots and lots of kind of probably chaos going on out here. Also, but if you think about it, they were continually building. So on top of all of that, there was sort of this, constant construction going on, and major construction at that, with these absolutely enormous pieces of stone. This is the temple next door. So we just saw this temple, Hera, and now we're going to take a look at this temple. So 100 years later, this temple went up, 450 BC. So they're still reinforcing this idea of Greek identity and Greek dominance here in this temple, which is dedicated to perhaps Zeus, perhaps Apollo. This is 6 by 14. So 6 columns this way, 14 columns this way. It is 80 by almost 200 feet. It's actually not that much larger. The footprint is not that much larger than the Temple of Hera that we just saw, but the scale is just kind of exponentially larger. Where the Temple to Hera has 9 columns all the way across, the enormous columns here at this temple, there are only 6 of them, and they are just huge. They're 7 to 8 feet diameter at their base. In fact, they're so big, they have 24 flutes. They couldn't even use the 20 flutes. They had to actually add some because they would have been too big. It's also raised on a mound. It's kind of hard to see that. You can see that there's 3 steps here that lead up to kind of the podium. There are actually 4 more steps underground.
We have some problem with the internet connection of Elaine.
That whole space, can you see me?
Yeah, now Elaine, we have some problem with your audio.
Okay.
Okay.
Should I change?
Yeah, now we can set.
You can hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. We've had some storms come through. My internet's wobbly. So the idea here is that the proportions are just absolutely kind of enormous, and they've even set the temple up on a man-made mound. So the impression here is just one of kind of dominance and might. Looking at it a little bit more closely, you can see the interior, which has kind of a particular row of columns. These 2 rows of columns are actually double. They're double decker. They're 2-story. Can you see that here? Doric columns here. And create space so they could have their out and face the rising sun. This temple was again built in local stone and covered in white paint and colors, and it also had this particular feature of the sema, which had the downspouts that went all along here. This is an example of it. It was made in pure white marble. They did not have pure white marble here, so the downspouts with the lion's head and the kind of egg and dart decoration, that actually is done in marble that came from Paros in Greece. They actually imported the marble to kind of circle the cornice of this temple. So that's how important this was for them. They actually imported this pure white marble. And there are some comparisons here you can make with the Parthenon itself. So the Parthenon on the Acropolis in Athens was built at the very same time. And actually, if you look at this, it's got the same kind of double-decker column thing going on. This is the Parthenon longitudinal section, and here's a longitudinal section of the temple to, we think, maybe Zeus, maybe Apollo here in Paestum. So again, kind of amazing, these, very much kind of particular little architectural details are being traded back and forth. And then you can see recreations of both of the Parthenon on the right with heavy sculptural detail up in the pediment, and then the temple of Zeus or Apollo there on the left in Paestum, Posiedona. So again, we don't know who the temple was dedicated to. We think perhaps Zeus, perhaps Apollo. We don't have a cult statue, but there was a statue of Zeus that was found out front. It was found in pieces, kind of buried in some of those little structures out in front of the temples. This is not a cult statue. This is terracotta, so it's a very humble material. It's also just over life size. The cult statue would have been just sort of, enormous and filled up the entire structure. But this is interesting from that time period, what the statue of Zeus does look like. So the town was, went along happily, and for several hundred years, they did have an incursion of one of the local tribes, and basically became Lucanian, one of the Lucani, or one of these tribes down there in central Italy. But that was more of an integration than anything else. Rome came in. Rome conquered this area in 273 BC, and they really put their mark on the town. Luckily for us, they worshiped the same gods as the Greeks, so they used different names. So right, instead of Zeus and Hera, they were worshiping Jupiter and Juno, but they were actually doing it in the same temple. So they kind of kept the temples, they let them stand, and they maintained the temples. They changed up a little bit the center of town. The Agora became the Forum. And then obviously hundreds and hundreds of years passed, and the housing, the residences were rebuilt and whatnot. But the main structures here, the main Greek temples, were preserved. They did go out of their way, though, to get rid of two very Greek structures here on the site at the Agora. The Heroon, which you see on the left, Heroon means place of a hero. And this is the symbolic tomb of the founder of town. So there's actually no one buried here. In fact, all burials took place outside the walls of town. But this is a symbolic tomb, and the Romans covered it up, just covered it up, just get that right out of sight. And then they also covered up what you see there on the right. And these, of course, have been uncovered by archaeologists, so we can see them today. This is what they look like today. On the right, that kind of looks almost like an amphitheater. It is, in fact, kind of a small amphitheater. That is the Ecclesiasterion, which is the location of kind of an assembly of Greek citizens. This could seat 1,500 men. It was basically kind of a seat of democracy, their symbol of democracy. So the Romans didn't want anything to do with Greek democracy, and they got rid of it. They buried it. They actually put a temple on top of it. They completely buried it and put another structure on top of it. They were definitely trying to kind of wipe out this Greek identity, which in any event was, I think, slightly porous. I think when we study works of art like this, we tend to think, oh, here are the Greeks. And they actually were, in fact, trying to project this Greek identity. But we believe that they were intermarrying with these local tribes. And then we know that there was also kind of great cultural exchange, at least with the Etruscans to the north. And we can see that in a tomb outside the walls, 1 kilometer south of town. This is an odd reconstruction. I'll show you the real thing in a minute. They found this tomb. They found several tombs. This tomb is called the Tomb of the Diver, and this is an extremely famous work of art. It's kind of got this enigmatic image of this guy diving here, and then on the interior is a scene of a symposium or a banquet scene. So this was discovered 50 years ago. It was kind of a shock, and it's kind of it's just a super important object. So it's a tomba a casta, or a kind of a chest burial chamber created with stone slabs. And the stone slabs here are painted in fresco, and they're actually not just painted in fresco, they're actually showing figures. And that's what's such a huge deal here, because Greeks didn't do that. This is what Greek tombs look like up until this time, and for a good while afterwards. This is what Greek tombs look like. This is a nice one. This is actually a tomb of an elite, frescoed on the inside, and very nicely done using good technique. And it's called the Tomb of the Palmettes because the corner of the cover slab has palmettes. So this is quite typical. Greeks just did not use figurative painting inside their tombs. They just didn't. The Etruscans did that. And the Etruscans did it, they're almost garishly so in comparison. They're lovely, but in comparison to the austere Greek tombs. So this is two examples. Here are two examples of Etruscan tomb painting. The one on the left is a symposium banquet scene from a tomb up in Tarquinia, which is kind of at the level of Rome. And one reason that they did this is because the relatives of the deceased would come in and, pay their respects or venerate their deceased relatives. So these were actually used by, members of society would come in and actually pay their respects to the dead. The Greeks didn't do that though. The Greeks, had these just, basically a coffin or a sarcophagus kind of thing buried. The only person who could see the inside of it was the deceased themselves. So on the right, you're looking at some more Etruscan tomb painting. It's not quite as developed, and it's also not in very good condition. But this is from Ponte Cagnano, which is that Etruscan settlement very close to the border of Posiedona. So the idea that while all Greek tombs that we know of, there may be more out there, what they've uncovered so far look like this, until all of a sudden one day, 50 years ago, they opened this thing up, and here we go, and it's kind of a shock. So this is a Greek tomb. We know that it was an elite person from Posiedona, later called Paestum. And we also know that it was done by a workshop in town. They've kind of compared the materials that were used. This was done around the time that second temple was, the big temple to Zeus or Apollo was created, and the materials there and the materials on the Tomb of the Palmettes and this tomb are all the same, came out of the same workshop. And another reason this is such a big deal is that this is basically the only ancient Greek wall painting that we have. We just don't have any. They didn't survive. There were lots of ancient Greek painters. We know a lot about them, but the materials they were using just didn't survive. And so we don't have anything, and we have this. So what we're looking at is this kind of a banquet scene. And on the short sides, on the left, you see the deceased who's kind of entering into this banquet. And then on the right short wall, you can see a large crater that's used for mixing water and wine. So at the symposium, the men are, and women, I think sometimes participated, were laying on their triclinium and they're drinking wine out of cups. And the wine is mixed with water. That's how the Greeks drank wine. 3-to-1 ratio, water to wine. And here they are. So they're singing, they are reciting poetry, they're playing musical instruments, they're discussing philosophy and politics. They're playing games, they're inviting their friends in. So they're sort of celebrating their deceased friend. You can see this guy there on the left is kind of gesturing to the deceased, like, come join me on my clean. The guy on the right seems to be, even asking maybe for some more wine. He's looking out towards the other direction. And the guy in the middle is playing kotabos. At the end of a banquet, they would toss the last bit of wine from their cup into a small metal plate. And if they hit it just right, this plate was kind of balanced on top of a staff. It would fall off and make a noise. And that was kind of the goal of this. So that's what that guy's doing. So again, the painting here, this is not very elaborate painting or super involved. There's no chiaroscuro, there's no modeling, light and shade. It's very graphic. It's almost more like it's kind of a colored in drawing of a sort. I mean, look at the way the muscles on those guys are depicted. It's just kind of a line, right? It's not a lot of shade. There's also not a huge attempt at creating perspective or creating depth, although they have, gone to some trouble to make it obvious that this guy is in front of this guy, right? This guy's laying behind that other guy. So again, it's just it's such a big deal because this is all we have of Greek painting. and it survived because it's fresco painting. Fresco actually sort of is literally a chemical reaction kind of between like layers of kind of calcium carbonate plaster, and the colors literally become the wall. And then it was sealed and buried, so it was luckily did not receive too much humidity. It had temperature control and came to us practically intact. So that's why we get so excited over this. Here's the other wall. You can see here they're playing instruments. There's a guy singing. They seem to be conversing. Look at the guy on the very far left. He is looking back at the deceased, and he's holding an egg, which is a symbol of rebirth. And he's also in his other hand holding a type of a lyre called the barbitos. So it's a stringed instrument, and the sound box is a tortoise shell. And interestingly, there's two of those depicted in the scenes here in the tomb. And there was actually one placed in the tomb. Very few grave goods were placed in the tomb with the deceased, who they think was a young boy. The skeleton disintegrated as soon as the lid was opened, but they think it was an adolescent. So that was the idea. The goods that were found in the tomb were what was left of a barbitos, so parts of this tortoise shell with a little bit of the kind of a metal bit that would have helped connect the wood and the strings. And then you can see a reconstruction of that on the right. And then there is an example of one painted on a vase called a lekitos, which was also found in, not that one, but one similar was found in the tomb with the remains of the guy we call the diver, because here's what the cover slab looks like. So here's this amazing image between the palmettes. There's this young man who is just, diving off of this platform into the Mediterranean Sea. And it's presumed that he is the deceased. And we're not, it's kind of an enigmatic image. Images of diving are extremely rare. Diving as a sport wasn't really a thing. Swimming and diving weren't really sports. You don't ever see those things depicted. So it's believed that perhaps this was part of one of those initiation rites, marking the passage from adolescent to manhood. They had to pass a kind of a proof of courage, and they believe that's what this is. It's also very much kind of this idea of the metaphorical passage from earthly life to the afterlife. And you can see a close-up here of this guy. I mean, his head is up, his eyes are open, and he is affronting his fate, his future, the afterlife with courage. So that idea of rebirth and afterlife is sort of front and present for these people who are kind of going and participating in these rituals at the temples of Hera, and then here represented again. And then very similar to the beliefs, of course, of Christian Easter, which is now just a few weeks out. So we are going to make an Easter cake, which is typical to this area, specifically the city of Naples, which is nearby here. Here are the recipes. Here's the ingredients I'm going to use to make the Pastiera, which is this kind of famous Neapolitan Easter cake. Okay, Lorenzo, tutto bene?
Yeah, Elaine, we have a good question that I find you for Courtney, who ask, why did the Western Greeks use more paint than sculpture? And then, was it a local Etruscan influence, or did they lack the sculptors? Any idea?
I think it was just kind of aesthetic choice, because they had the sculptors. They made good sculpture. There are examples also in Sicily of sculpted relief of the relief metopes, and even some sculpture on the pediments. It was just done in a different way. And I think it was just their taste. I think it was literally a matter of taste. They had the artisans. They could do it. They could make the sculpture. They had the stone, and they had the know-how. They just opted for color and paint and painted decorations. It may have had something to do. I don't know the answer to that. It might have had something to do with the money available. Could be. I think sculpture costs more than painting. But you find examples of it here and there. In Sicily, there's metopes on one temple, and next to it is just paint, just like we saw. Temple of Hera had sculpted metopes. The Temple of Hera at the river had sculpted metopes. The one in town didn't. So I'm not really sure. I do think it was just a matter of taste. But that's a good question. So I'm going to start with our pastiera, and I'm going to make the filling first. And the filling is a mixture of ricotta, which if I get close enough, I think you can actually see that fresh sheep's milk ricotta. And I'm going to mix it together with sugar. And basically all the ingredients here are relatively easy to come by and sort of standard things. Just the combination is so fresh, very much kind of springtime flavors. The ricotta is definitely kind of a sign of spring in a certain way, in that the sheep are being milked again. And then the interesting ingredient here is grano cotto, which is cooked grain, and it's wheatberries, and it's boiled wheatberries. And here you can actually buy it in the store in a jar, and it's called grano cotto per pastiera napoletana. This is cooked grain, cooked wheatberries for a pastiera. I decided to actually cook my grain myself. So I got grain from Lorenzo. Mi fai mutare il tuo microfono?
Sì.
Okay. So here's grain that I just got, just wheatberries from the mill, and got some grain, and they're hard as rocks, these little things. And so they get soaked for sort of a day and a half and then boiled, and then they kind of start to kind of fall apart. You can kind of see they kind of open up, kind of pop open. And then once this happens, they get boiled again. This is one of those Easter recipes where you get started on Holy Thursday so that you have something to eat for lunch by the time you get to Sunday. So it takes a couple days. So you might get started on that. Even on Wednesday would help, because the wheat has to soak for a while. It's not difficult, it's just a little time consuming. So the wheat is soaked, boiled in water, and then it gets boiled in milk. And so here's the wheat boiled in milk with orange zest and a bit of old vanilla bean, already used vanilla bean. And it kind of turns into this sort of, not really custard, but kind of creamy mix that gets mixed in with the ricotta and the sugar. And it really gives it this kind of, this very interesting texture. It adds a little kind of nutty flavor, and then really kind of an interesting little, kind of almost a bite when you bite into it. And then the other flavorings here are citrus zest, candied orange, and orange flower water. There's also a little bit of vanilla. I'm going to use half a vanilla bean. So I'm just scraping out the seeds from half of a vanilla bean. And these things are great. They're so, if y'all use these, then you probably know how aromatic they are. Even after you scrape out the seeds, you can put the kind of used vanilla bean into a pack of sugar to make sort of vanilla sugar, at which point you don't need vanilla anymore. Or I just used a piece for the grain, for example, or if you make custard, that kind of thing. So that gets mixed in. And then this super kind of flowery, this is orange flower water in its own little vial. I think you can, this is probably fake. You can probably get a real version of this. This is sold in the shops here, specifically to make things like pastiera. That's very kind of just perfumey, floral. You know, citrus flowers have that just kind of heady aroma. And I'm going to add a little bit of zest, both orange and lemon. All these things together are relatively simple again, but they kind of give it this, have an unmistakable flavor once you put them all together, and it just really tastes like Naples. I'm using just a touch of candied orange peel, which people use this a lot here, so I bought this, and it's actually quite good. You can also make this yourself, and I'll send you the recipe. When I send you the recipe for the cake, I'll send you the recipe for the candied orange peel. If you can't get good ones, it's kind of not worth using. So you can either make it yourself or just you can actually skip it. There's enough orange in here as it is. This kind of gives another little bit of texture, so I kind of like it for that. But sometimes candied orange peel tends to taste like cough medicine. So if that's what it's going to taste like, I just leave it out. This is a good one though. So I'm going to go ahead and put it in. And then all this gets mixed with 2 eggs and 2 yolks. And then they say it's good to let it sit for a while. So you can also make this sort of the day before. Also, letting it sit helps the flavors come together. Everything just gets perfumed with the citrus zest.
Elaine, puoi far vedere anche l'impasto?
See, I'll show you this. Let me get it mixed in better so I don't pour raw eggs all over the place. So this makes a really dense, but also very kind of moist filling. It really is kind of a cheesecake. I mean, it is a cheesecake, ricotta cheesecake. So here's the filling. If y'all can see that. My eggs were super yellow. The egg yolks were just super yellow. So it kind of tinted it, tinged. So the flavors here are just kind of milky ricotta, and then the citrus, and then that just the heady aroma of the orange flower water. Just really lovely. So that gets put into kind of a pie crust, but the pie crust is kind of fortified with some eggs so that it actually holds all of the kind of that moist filling. And it's also got a good bit of sugar in it. These Neapolitan desserts are super, super sweet. So it's almost kind of comes out to be like it's almost like a sugar cookie dough, which is kind of good. So when you have scraps, you just turn it into sugar cookies. So I'm going to do this the way they do it, which is kind of make a well. I put in so sugar, flour, a pinch of salt, a little bit of lemon zest. I have a pastry scraper, which always makes this a little bit easier. So you can, I'm going to add then cold butter chopped into cubes. You can do this in I'm just kind of squeezing it between the butter and the flour between my fingers and thumbs. You can also just kind of mash it down onto the countertop. You can also do this with a pastry blender that I don't have one out here. The utensil with just all of those little rings that you just kind of go like this to cut the butter, or you could use a Cuisinart and just kind of pulse it. Although I think that mixes it too much, and I don't think you would get as light of a pastry, but you can also do that. I'm opting for the hand method. So just kind of squish all of the butter into the flour. So what you're trying to do here is kind of a flaky pastry, but then there's enough liquid added in that gets kneaded slight little bit at the end. It's not totally like pie crust, but that's basically the procedure.
Elaine, Chris, I have a question. And is the orange flower water also used in the Neapolitan pasta frolla?
In the pasta frolla, no.
No.
It's not in the pasta frolla. It's used in the filling, and then there's some zest, lemon zest here, but not the citrus flower water. They also, by the way, the frolla, this is pasta frolla, but the frolla for a pastiera is for some reason called pitola. Did you know that, Lorenzo?
Sorry?
Si chiama pitola.
Yeah.
Sapevi questo?
No, I don't know, but I don't know the name, the pasta frolla name of the Neapolitan. I think the name is only frolla. No?
Well, I heard now they call it pitola. I don't know why they call it pitola.
Yeah, but pasta frolla is the same of the Italian pasta frolla. You have pasta frolla, pasta sfoglia, and other.
See, I think it is. Yes, I think it is. So I'm going to use another egg and egg yolk like I did before. So I just made a little kind of a well with my flour. So I'm going to mix the egg in there. I just kind of mix in from the outside, and then I'm going to use my pastry scraper to kind of help me mix everything up. I may need to add some water in here, I'm not sure. If I've used 1 egg and 1 egg yolk, and if it's not liquid enough, I'm going to add a little bit of cold water. Let's see, might be enough. You don't want to add too much liquid. So I'm going to try to skip the water. But I think I'm going to need it. You also don't want to add too much egg because it does end up being like a sugar cookie. I'm going to get some cold water. I'll be right back. So this has to rest too. You can all do all of this ahead of time, put it all in the fridge. And then on sort of the day before Easter, Saturday, you can put everything together. And this is also, it's really good if it sits for a bit. So again, all those flavors come together. So you want to kind of work this just until it kind of comes together and forms a ball of dough. Here you can see it's really starting to come together. It's really particular. I've never made any other recipe that has quite so much sugar in the dough. And it really makes kind of a soft, really kind of almost a sugar cookie dough. But it cooks up really crisply, so that it is a good casing for that very moist, that kind of large quantity of very moist filling. So there's the dough. Again, just kind of form it into a ball and then put this aside, kind of wrap it in plastic wrap and let it sit in the fridge even overnight before you use it. So I'm going to roll out one, which I have sitting in the fridge. So this is to make the base of the pastiera, and then it has kind of a little lattice on top, which they're very particular about their lattice on top.
Elaine, we have a very wonderful question.
Okay, good.
How did you learn to cook?
Who asked me that?
Yeah, John's.
How did I learn to cook? I really like to eat. So
It's the best food.
I like to cook because I like to eat. And then I learned to cook from both my parents cook, and I just sort of keep my eyes open when I am out and about and in other people's kitchens. And I like to ask people to teach me recipes also. I'm not very shy about that. I'm shy about some things, but I'm not shy about that. So this dough, because it's basically sugar cookie dough, is a little bit soft. So you want to roll it out to just sort of, I don't know, 1/4 of an inch. And some flour helps. See how that is. Kind of sticky. I'm gonna make it a little bit thinner than this. It's kind of sticky, which is kind of good because if it sticks and rips, it'll just stick back together. So it's kind of forgiving. Okay.
In one of my first cooking class in English, not in Italian, of course, I made a very terrible error in language. So I make the dog of the fresh pasta, and they say that the dog is stinky, not sticky. and I see the people who say what and I repeat stinky but
I didn't think that sounded very good.
Yeah, the flavor was bad. Was good.
All right, so to get this into the pan, cut a circle, and then you can just sort of fold it into quarters, and then lay it in the center and unfold it. And there you go.
Okay, so Joanne, I have to told you that it's not a cheesecake. This.
Why?
Joanne did say, how does this cheesecake differ from regular Italian cheesecake? I think if you tell to a Neapolitan people from Naples that is a cheesecake, is not a
they
good...
wouldn't like it. No, I called it a cheesecake because it kind of is a cheesecake.
Yeah, but it's not a cheesecake. It's a pastiera.
It's
like to say to a Florentine that the T-bone steak is a T-bone steak. No, it's a Florentine. It's the same. The word that are important, no?
Yes, they are. So this is a pastiera. So I am also going to prick the bottom here so that any little bit of humidity doesn't make it soggy. So here's the crust in the pan. I prick the bottom a little bit. I'm going to put in the filling, and then make the ever important lattices. They're very, like I said, they're particular about their lattices. They have to be 7. And apparently, some people say it's because of the Roman layout to the town of Naples, which has, I think, 3 decumani and 4 cardi. Some people say that's just the way it is, period. There's no explanation for it, doesn't matter, but there's 7. So 7 lattices. So this is how high up the filling is. The filling is almost, it's kind of half an inch below the layer of the crust, and the filling has enough eggs in it that it actually does kind of fluff up. I'm going to cut some lattices out of this. You can also re-roll the dough. There's no problem there. Like I said, it's very forgiving, very sugary, eggy dough. Let's see if I can get enough lattices out of here, though. I'm using antique pastry crimpers. They're making my life difficult. Let's see, 1, 2, 3.
What size is the pan?
I need to measure that. I need to measure the pan for you. Yeah. I'll send you the recipe and I'll let you know. I don't remember exactly. It's basically a pie plate. The pan is another extremely important part of this whole thing. They call it a rotto. Did you know that, Lorenzo?
Sorry?
Lo chiamano rotto. Non
Cosa?
rotta, rotto. La teglia. So they always do it in a metal pan. It's kind of basically like our kind of a pie plate. It's a little bit sbazzatoed. Almost always. This is an example of one that you get at a Neapolitan pastry shop. It just comes like a hubcap. The thing about the pan, though, is that when you give somebody a pastiera, you give them the pan. And I remember the first time I had this, a Neapolitan woman gave me one. I said, "Oh, I'll give your pan back. You know, I'll give your pan back tomorrow, whatever." She's like, "No, no, 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 no. It's yours. You don't give the pan back." I was like, "Oh." So they kind of tend to use these relatively flimsy little pans, and everybody has a stock of them, and you give them out. So I think it's kind of cute. Okay, so 3, there's 3. Let's see how I can get 4 on here on top. So 3 on the bottom. There's 1. Let's see, I have 1 that'll go. There's 2. I'll have to piece these together. Three. I'm almost there. 1 more small one. There. Okay, so there's the pastiera with its 3 plus 4. In fact, you're not supposed to say 7 lattices. You're supposed to say 3 plus 4, and I can't tilt that too far. And they don't get, you know, woven either. So I'm gonna go put this in the oven, and then I'm gonna come back and I'll show y'all a done pastiera and serve it up. Lorenzo, a che ore sono? Or mi dici?
19:36.
Okay, good. So it cooks for almost an hour, 50 to 60 minutes in a hot oven. And then when it's done, this is what it looks like. Isn't that lovely? Pastiera. And I'm gonna cut it open and show y'all the lovely interior.
Ce l'hai in piatto?
Sì. So there is the pastiera. Isn't that? Hang on, I have to get the light here is so bad. Hang on. Se spengo questo, eccoci.
Meglio.
There we go. Doesn't that look great? And it's just such kind of heady, almost perfumey flavor, and this kind of dense, moist texture, and then those little bits of wheat in there just make it super kind of interesting dessert. So happy Easter, everybody. Any more questions?
If you want, you can turn on your mic, and then you can make some question.
No questions.
No?
All right, I'm going to send y'all. I'm going to
I
send
have
y'all
a
the recipe
question.
tomorrow.
Yeah, wait, we have
Yeah.
a question.
Okay.
I have a question. This is Jean from Mississippi.
Hey,
Um,
Jean.
Hi. I wanted to ask, where do we get the wheat berries? I have no idea where to get those.
I am not sure either. I think in health food stores, because it's the whole grain. I think you can use. I think you can find wheat berries in health food stores. You might be able to get them from the King Arthur catalog since they sell flour. And then you can. Okay.
Amazon. Okay.
Amazon. I can get everything else. You can actually. I think you can probably find. You can probably find this grano cotto, cooked wheat for pastiera. I think they sell this in the United States. So you can skip that whole step and just pour it out of a jar.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question.
Elaine,
I tried to find the pan online and they don't know what I'm talking about when I say a Neapolitan pastiera pan.
Well,
They
it's
said-
basically a metal pie dish. It's what it is. It's
A metal pie dish with a cover.
You can use the same of the
cover's
cheesecake.
cute. The cover's kind of cute, but no, the thing is though, but here in Italy, they don't make pie. They don't make pie. That doesn't exist. So they don't have pie plates. But our pie plate with the kind of the vasato, edge, that's what this is, but it's metal. So just get it's just a metal, I put it in the oven. It's just a metal pie plate. Here's another one, look. This is sort of, I think they use this for pudding.
Okay.
Yeah, you don't.
is the interior? It looks a little spongy. It looks. Is it got holes in it, or was that the fruit?
That's the wheat. That's the wheat and the candied fruit. No holes.
Looks good. Looks delicious.
It's actually really delicious, and it's just like again, it's kind of these heady aromas and all this zest and the lemon flower water and the orange flower water and all that. It's quite nice. It's very springy, and then the ricotta gives kind of a milkiness to it. So it's really an interesting mix.
And then I gotta say that Lorenzo wins the hair contest between you and.
I cut my hair, but they don't know.
Look like you cut it with a lawnmower.
I capito cosa detto.
No?
A weed eater. That's what you look like.
I tagliato con un dente spogliatore.
Yeah. I'm going by the lawn over man and days.
And Elaine, non dimenticare tuo fratello.
Thank you. Right. It's my brother's birthday. Thank you. I will send him a message.
One last question back to the pastiera. Did you grease that with butter, the pan?
Buttered pan. Yes, the pan is buttered.
You got it out. It looks like it came out very easily.
It does. I did use a buttered pan. Yes, thank you for pointing that out. And I just run a knife around there, and it pops. Yeah, it just turns right out because that dough, like I said, it just forms this casing that really it holds the liquid of the humidity of the interior, and it does not at all stick. It just pops right out of that pan.
So you wouldn't need to use like parchment paper maybe on the bottom? No. Okay.
No, just buttered it. And I don't even some people say to use a spring form, but if you use a spring form, then it's not the right shape. And so I prefer to just use the pastiera pan. So it works fine. It works out really well.
Grazie.
Okay. Bene, prego. So I'll send you all the recipe for the pastiera and also the orange zest tomorrow. So good to see all y'all. Thank you for tuning in. I think y'all might have noticed we're kind of on a monthly schedule these days as opposed to our every 2 week schedule that we started out with. So we'll be back in a month with more recipes. Okay.
Brava.
Grazie.
Grazie.
Buona Pasqua.
Buona Pasqua.
Happy Easter. Buona Pasqua a tutti.
Bye.
Ciao.
Bye.
Ciao. Ciao.
Thank you.
They can,
You're
yeah.
welcome.
Leave it on until she
Bye.
turns it on. You can turn your microphone on. So